I'm back. Thanks for the segue. I've never had a segue quite like that before. I've been two places. As I said, I like to be in two places at once at the same time. I'm going to talk about our organisation and roughly, on our journey. And part of our journey was how do we start to think not only about the present, not only about the next couple of years, but how do we start to think about the long term? How do we start to think about the environment and what's going on around us? And to sort of set that up, I thought I'd just share a story. When I got off the plane in Wellington yesterday, I checked my voicemail, and there was a message from my just turned 5 about a month ago, my 5-year-old daughter Mackenzie, and it said, "Hi Daddy, this is Mackenzie Catt, missing you, just wanted to say hello," and then she hung up. And I assumed that she had talked to my wife and got on the phone and said, "I miss Daddy," and rung up and left a message. So I sent a message, I said, "Oh, lovely message from Mackenzie," and my wife went, "What? How'd she do that?" And then she asked her, and the answer is, I talked to the lady and said, "Dial Daddy Catt." And she did. And I ended up with a voicemail message on our phone. And I think for those of us with kids, and particularly those of us with kids in that kind of younger age, I think this is one of the wonderful things, always focusing my mind on what kind of world are these guys going to be living in? What's going to be happening in the future? Such an important question. And such an important question for us as organisations. So look, I'll talk a little bit about us. We, as Greg said, we've got just under 10,000 members. We're the professional organisation for veterinarians. And we adopted this vision statement about 2 years ago. And what it's really trying to say for us is we've probably spent the majority, the 91 years or 92 years we've been around looking at the profession. We're looking at vets, with vets talking to vets. We've been sort of quite inward looking. And when we were challenged to get our heads over the horizon, to think about the next 15 or 20 or 30 years, and we thought about the sector that we work in, which is very dynamic, very changing, huge amount of stuff going on, it's a really exciting place to be, it became very obvious that to survive even, but more than that, we don't want to survive, we want to prosper and keep growing the way we have been for the last decade or so, we need to reposition ourselves. And that repositioning is, we want to be a leader. And our facilitator said, well, everyone wants to be a leader. You'll write that in your vision statement. Where do you want to be a leader? And what we realised was, along with the agricultural industries, along with the pet care, the industries that we work with, we want to sit there with them, and our leadership place is about animal health and animal welfare. And just as we want to put vets into those organisations and make sure their place is you are the leaders when it comes to health and welfare in those organisations, when it comes to advocacy, when it comes to science, when it comes to the more systemic things, we want to occupy that position as an organisation. And what it made us do immediately was start saying, do you look like a leader? Do you act like a leader? Do people see you as a leader? And the answer almost overwhelmingly to all those questions when we walked out of the planning room was no. So a huge part of our strategy is now shaped by how do we become a leader. Our brand, our IT, so much of it is about how do you reposition yourselves so you actually measure up to your aspirations. And part of that is this idea of bringing into the boardroom, looking at the trends that are going on out there and starting to think about not just what's going on today, not just our strategic plan, but what is the world going to look like that we're working in, that our members are working in. We call it environmental scanning. If you're into this stuff, it draws a lot on what you would probably call foresighting as a technique. And it's something that we've put together because we want something practical that works for us and works particularly in our boardroom. And so we've kind of adopted this, and I hope it's of some value to you in thinking about why we do things. So if you've done your MBA, you remember Porter's 5 forces. These are the trends that are external, that impact businesses and impact industries. And we're surrounded by those trends. And so really, we do this because we want to identify and we want to assess disruption. And so we have this notion now, disruption's all around us. We all get that, don't we? Everything's disruptive. And but I think one of the misapprehensions of that sometimes is that disruption sort of appears in a blinding flash of light, and suddenly there's a new business or a new technology, and it undermines, everything goes to, it doesn't happen that way. You know, the Uber existed for a long time in tandem with taxis. Businesses have to build, they have to get traction, consumers have to like their business model. So disruption exists for quite a long time, and what we're concerned is not with, oh my God, there's a blinding flash of light. What we're concerned with is, can we study what's going on out there? Can we see what that means for our members and for ourselves sometimes? And can we think about how we bring that into our strategic planning and our shorter term thinking so we do something about it? And that's what this is all about. We do it because we don't want to end up like this. And because if you don't identify and analyse and study disruption, that's the way you go. You blithely ignore the forces that are going to impact on you, and you end up like that box of film, which looks like it's in some sort of museum installation, really. That's probably where it is. And we do it, which I think is particularly appropriate to this forum. We do it because it's good governance. And I don't know about you, but for several years when I was new to this job, I used to have a kind of conversation with directors, and it went like this. It went, Graham, I got on the board because I want to talk about my profession and what's going on out there, and I'm really frustrated because we don't do that in the boardroom. And the CEO would go, I'm sorry, Dr. X, that's not what the board's here for. You're here to receive reports, monitor the strategic plan, do all these kind of things. And neither party was right, neither party was wrong, and neither party was getting anywhere. Because to an extent they're right, but what's lacking in so many organisations, and the reason the CEO says the things we do, is we don't have a structure for having those conversations well. We don't have a structure or a system for saying, let's talk about what's going on out there, but let's do it in a useful way that lets us actually gather that intelligence and do something with it. And effectively, that's what boards should be doing. That's what Kodak didn't do. That's what your board needs to do. If they're governing well, they're looking into the future. They're thinking about disruption. They're thinking about what's going to whack your members in the future and what you're going to do about it. That's good governance. That's the role of the board. But sitting around a board table chatting about what I did last week isn't. So this is something we developed over time as a way of putting some structure and bringing that in the boardroom in a way that was useful. So how do we do it? And the first element of it is what I call the watch list. I'm not going to read it. I hope you can. But there's about 10 things on there, I think. Where did this come from? It came from our members. So as part of our strategic planning process, we got about 80 people in a room, and it was our volunteer leadership, our board, our management, some representatives of the members as well. And we basically said, what are the things you think are going on out there that we should be doing something about? Members love that terminology, do something about it, don't they? So that's the stuff that they thought we should be doing something about. We can't do something about all of that, but we can watch it. So that's our watch list. That's a list of the things that and it's an engagement exercise. You can do that in surveys, you can do that in the room, you can do it at conferences. It's a way of actually engaging and saying, tell us what you think is going on, what should your organisation be doing? And they're much more about this stuff, interestingly, aren't they, your members, than they are about your programs and your services and this is where they want to engage. It's a fantastic way, and we put this in our strategic plan. It's part of our strategy. These are the things we identify going on out there. So there's 10 things on that list. My board meets 6 times a year, and as I'm about to show you, it takes 2 meetings to go through this process, so we can look at about 3 of these things a year. So to do that, we have to prioritise. And this isn't rocket science, that's the schedule. And we basically look at that watch list, but what we're looking to do is to say, of those 10 things, is there something going on out there that tells us that we should be paying more attention to this? So we start the year with a schedule like that, but every year we look and we say, what's going on? Is welfare, something's happening that we should be stopping and spending a lot of time getting our heads around what's going on out there? Something's happening in technology, something's happening. So we actually once a year go through the process of looking at that list of 10 things and prioritising what's on it and saying, what should we be focusing on? What should we be bringing into the boardroom and talking about? That's the schedule. Like I said, it's not terribly rocket sciencey. And then we brainstorm. So we come into the boardroom. In this case, we're talking about technology, and we do what you typically do in a brainstorm. Get a whiteboard. I lead this. We write down a whole bunch of stuff, and we work through. No idea is a silly idea to start with. Many ideas are silly ideas to finish up with. We create the themes, and we create a list of. We want to get with our board down to when you say this, why is that an issue? Why is that something we should care about? Is it a risk? Is it an opportunity? What's it based on? And so we come up. This is after all the refining and the parsing and everything. This is the kind of list that we would come up with, and I won't read all the dot points again. But then we do something that's probably the most important part of this process, and we divide what comes up with the brainstorm into 2 things. Now, when you have those conversations with our members, what you get a lot of is perception. And perception is feeling. It's what I see, it's what I hear, it's what I think, it's what I feel is going on around me. What's going on around me now? It might be from talking to someone, it might be my observations. It is very, very rarely backed by any data or evidence, if ever. It's purely perception. And it's very important to say, okay, of these things on that list, what is the perception? And the other things that are on the list are scenarios, and we tend to conflate the two. So perceptions are what I see, what I feel, what I think, what I hear from other people going on around me right now. Scenarios are, and because of that, this is what I think is going to happen in the future. And it's quite important to divide those two things up, and we do it as part of the brainstorm. They're two quite different things. And then what we do is we give it back to people. So we say, we put together a research list. Because as I said, there's very little data or evidence that supports. So we've had a nice chat, we've had a board. When we started doing this, that's all we did. Had a brainstorm, that was cool. But not much really happened. Then we started saying, well, hang on, you guys are scientists, aren't you? One of our values in our organisation is we base our decision making on evidence. It's a core organisational value. There wasn't a lot of evidence going into this, there's a lot of perception. So we started saying, okay, let's do round two. I'm going to take the scenarios, I'm going to take the perceptions, I'm going to come up with some questions to test them, and we're going to go away and do some research. And we also, it's a great opportunity. I will put directors together who may not necessarily work together. I'll put directors with managers who could do with a bit of bonding. So it's a really good way, again, of creating some teamwork. And they go off in teams of about 3, and they go away and look at these questions and do some research. And then we bring those back into the boardroom. There's another one there about wearables, and the first one was about robotics. So we create this need to go away between board meetings, do some thinking, do some research, come up with some data, come up with some evidence. And it takes us in wonderful places, which I'll show you when it comes to the robots. So, and we don't make it hard. You know, like YouTube, Google, look at the Sydney Morning Herald, go to pretty easy to find primary sources. But the one thing I will say is someone gets the unfortunate task of quantitative data. Very important. There's a lot of qualitative cool stuff out there, which you'll see in a minute, but you also need quantifiable data. So someone makes a statement like, consumers are doing more of ... You've got to test it. You've actually got to say, well, are they? Where do you get the data? And places like Gartner, like AIBO, all those sort of sources are quite important as part of that to bring it together. So you'll need to think about who on your board, who likes quantitative data, who's good at that sort of research, and who likes to wander off down the more qualitative pathways like me. And then we bring this stuff back. So I thought I'd just give you some examples of the kind of stuff that comes through the exercise. This is the quantitative bit. So this was remember someone said wearables, more and more animals are, using wearable technology. Well, are they? We perceive that. So you can go and find some investor data. In actual fact, yes, they are. There's more and more investment in wearable technologies for animals. It's a huge market. You can't really read that. But there's a growing number of companies. You can find out where those companies are. You can find out what they're developing. You can find out what markets they're operating in. So you can actually come back and bring some data to bear on these perceptions and think about, okay, are they really therefore things we should be worrying about? On the qualitative thing, I thought I'd wander around the robot bit. And Brett showed you those clips before. They're from a company called Boston Dynamics. And Boston Dynamics, the dog-like thing with the can of drink is called Spot Mini. And Spot Mini is probably their first foray out of building robots for military application and into building robots that are clearly designed for consumer applications. So Spot Mini is a very dog-like thing that can do useful consumer things. But the questions, remember I posed, because the sort of things my guys were saying were, robotics, there'll be huge breakthroughs and vets will be part of them, and veterinary science will be contributing to human health. So there's an example of that. This is actually a CT scan that they developed at Penn State University. And the big thing about this CT scan is you can scan a horse while it's ambulant. So that's a very new technology. If you know anything about horses, scanning a horse is a fairly involved technique. You've got to knock the horse out, as in anaesthetise it, not actually knock it out. You've got to put it in a big thing, lift it up into a machine, put it in a CT scan. So this horse is about to be scanned, it's standing there. And that has huge implications, that technology, in going to human health, because now you can scan, imagine being able to scan little kids in a CT scan without putting them in that big scary tube. There's a whole range of applications, and that's starting to get into other places. And I thought, I was in the vet school, then I found this one. This is our Berta, and our Berta is a robot dog that's designed because someone didn't like the idea that vets were learning how to be vets by operating on live animals, and developed this robot, which is all about, it's a recreation of a live dog that you can practice on as a vet, but you don't hurt a dog. So it bleeds, you can kill it. And their vision, going back to their vision as a company is every vet school in the world uses these dogs and doesn't use live animals. Now, if you're a vet, you might have a different view. If you're a vet, the ethical considerations that throws up are massive. They're really, really interesting. And the debate about animal welfare or animal rights and training and vets and what's right and what's wrong, this sort of starts to take us down some very interesting ethical laneways. And here are Boston Dynamics, speaking of ethics. So Boston Dynamics, as I said, was a company, it's probably probably one of the most advanced robotics development companies in the world, but all of those robots are developed for military application to now. So you saw the one running through the snow. These are just big tough things that you send into war to carry stuff and go into places that humans can't go. And in 2013, Google bought them, right? So remember Google's motto? Do no evil. So it's very interesting to see, well, Google bought the leading robotics company, but their market is the military. Is that doing no evil? So that sparked a bit of a debate. And just after that debate started, this video went viral, and several of them went viral. And they are videos of Boston Dynamics employees kicking the crap out of these robots, understandably, to test them because they're for military applications and they're going to military situations. But it went ballistic. And this huge dialogue started up about, is it cruel to be kicking robots because the robots look like dogs? They've built things that actually are based on animal physiology, and so when we kick them, people associate the kicking of the robot with the kicking of an animal. And this huge dialogue started up about whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, and really actually sparked this big thing about everyone got involved, Peter got involved, a whole range of people got involved. So it sparked this huge ethic debate. And it made us think when we did the research, because ethics lie at the heart of veterinary science and animal use, and ethics also lie at the heart of the whole dialogue about technology. If you're a science fiction fan, it's always all about ethics, all this stuff. So it starts to create very interesting ethical organisation. And this one here, I found this on a blog, Wandering the Journey a little bit more. This is actually a guy who's a guru in employment, and he is positing that the future, if you have an engineering degree and a veterinary science degree and you bring them together, your future is rosy, because there are animals and increasingly bionics, and the ability to actually do things to animals to, you know, increase their life or their quality of life is going to be an important market. And there is the robotics stuff. So it's a wonderful job set to have, is to be an engineering and a veterinary science person. And then I thought we'd wander along the animal journey a little bit more. Did anyone watch this series with David Attenborough? So we kind of got into this idea of animatronics, and that animal physiology is used to develop these things, and you develop these really amazing animatronic animals. If you watch this series, these were developed for David Attenborough's series, and the reason they were developed is you can send these animals into live settings, and the animals don't know it's a camera, so they don't alter its behaviour. And if you watch the series, a really amazing thing, this monkey stopped working. It broke down, and there's amazing footage, it's probably on YouTube, and the footage is of the family grieving because the monkey's dead. So the mother monkey is cradling the monkey, and the whole group of monkeys are sitting around doing what they do when one of their I can't remember the right word, it's terrible, I'm the CEO of the veterinary, one of their group dies. So it's quite an amazing insight into what you can do with animatronics, and again, the kind of application that these robots have. And then just if you need a demonstration that they're very lifelike and very realistic, the tortoise on the bottom is the animatronic tortoise. So they achieved a level of reality with these animatronics that was hitherto unseen. So there's another application for these things, which they help us understand animal behaviour, and they help people like David Attenborough do the research that they do. And again, it's all based on using animal physiology to drive the animatronics. So that's all good. And if you think back to our original thinking, which was Veterinary science is going to contribute to robotics and new medical technologies. It's all going to be a wonderful, rosy world. It's all looking very rosy. But then as I meandered along the journey again, I came across this. So let's meet Chip.
For ages, the dog has been man's best friend. We want to introduce you to man's new best friend. Meet Chip. Chip is a robotic dog that's much more than just a cool gadget. Chip is an interactive pet that's there to greet you at the door. With the smart band, Chip recognizes who his owner is.
Hey, have you seen my other slipper? Have you seen my other slipper?
And shows affection to them when near. Chip is obedient and can follow commands. But he also learns new things, so you can teach him tricks. And the smarter Chip becomes, the more badges he earns. When you like what you see, just press the like button on the band, which can encourage him to behave. Or be a little mischievous. Your choices change Chip's behavior and shapes his personality, so that no two Chips are ever alike. Chip is a robot. Chip is a dog. But most importantly, Chip is a friend. The best kind.
Wowee. So Chip found the slipper. That useless dog couldn't find it. That dog's looking a bit sad, isn't it? But I think the power of marketing, the beginning of that thing, for ages, the dog has been man's best friend, not anymore. Now we've got Chip. I watched that. I've got two daughters. I've got Mackenzie that left the message on the phone, and I've got an 8-year-old daughter, Edie. I watched that with Edie, who was 7, and she dreamed about that every night for 2 weeks. Genuinely, she wasn't making it up. She was dreaming about Chip. She loves it because that thing's got a friggin', it's got an app. It's got a wristband. Not like dogs. A dog just lies around and sleeps and breaks wind. Our dog does anyway. So, does that have implications for our profession? Absolutely. And interestingly, when I wandered along that little journey, I found some research, and the research actually says the dog that everyone knows is AIBO, which is the Sony dog. When I did research on AIBO, kids do not differentiate between live dogs and those robot dogs until they reach a certain age, and it's the age when empathy kicks in, which is about 8, which is about my daughter's age now. So until that point, the fact it's a robot dog, they bring exactly the same things to bear. And when you think about kids and empathy, they struggle with it. I remember my dog had a tick bite. He went to the vet for a week. My 8-year-old, they didn't know he was missing. They love the dog, love him when he's there, but their level of empathy is all about them, isn't it? It's not all about... So these things are really amazing, and what that tells us is there are... And it raises a lot of ethical issues again, very interesting ones, because if you were a family and you were going to buy a dog, and you were going to be a terrible dog-owning family, and that dog was going to have a bad life, and you bought Chip instead, that's a good welfare outcome from an animal welfare point of view. Is it better that they're buying robots and not buying dogs? And it raises a huge amount of questions about what vets call the human-animal bond, which says that, we bond with these animals. If you can create a robot that you can bond with in the same way, what's it say about the human-animal bond? Is it a construct? It takes you into these really, really interesting worlds. But from a purely business point of view, is that a threat? Absolutely. So what do we do with all this lovely information? We need to feed it into a machine and get it out. No, so we come back to the boardroom. That's part 2 of this. We go away, we do the research, we work in our teams. People love it. It's great. It's really good. They get into it's fantastic wandering along a road like this. You've got to be careful not to give the qualitative people quantitative research, okay? But what we do is we come back in, we bring that stuff back into the boardroom. We basically dump it all into a Dropbox or a SharePoint or whatever you use. So we don't want 15 people to stand up and talk for 30 minutes about what they found out. So we actually create an archive of all the reports. We say, write up your report, do it in writing, and we put it into a repository so people can come back and watch it. But what we do is we come back into the boardroom, we consider what we learned, and then we come up with scenarios. We're not worried about perceptions now. We've tested them. That's part of the process. But what we want is scenarios, and what we want is scenarios that we will take into strategy. And so what we got out of the robotics one, animal physiology is a basis for animatronics, and it will be. and they address a range of applications from war to making robot dogs that will substitute for pets. And there are real opportunities for veterinary science to contribute. If you're going to create an industry around animatronic animals, veterinary science has got a key role to play in that. So there is a future there. Robots might replace animals for clinical training, and that has applications back out into other areas where animals are used for testing. If you can create realistic physiology, things that bleed, then there are other applications out there. And that creates this huge ethical debate, and there'll be new ethical issues about as robot animals increase. And lastly, that the robotics industry will produce substitutes that compete with pet ownership. So how do we bring that into strategy? And that's what this is all about. Remember I said at the beginning, you could do all this and have a great time and you'll be happier. But our object is to go, we do this so we can inform our strategic planning, and we can bring into our strategic planning, into our shorter term horizons, things to do, concrete things to do. And so here's some examples again, and remember, this is only robots. This is like 1/5 of that whole technology scan. So it's just one little stream that we wandered along for way of example. What we can do, and one of the things I realise, and we still don't do it well, is the most obvious thing to do is bring that out of the boardroom. So 15 people got to have that discussion and got to learn these things and got to have those perspectives. Why don't we turn that into content for our members? Because they were the ones that said we should watch it in the first place. And we don't do this as well as we should. We're sort of trying to work on it at the moment. But how do we turn that into content? It could be white paper, it could be conference, an actual presentation you could give at a conference, or write it up in a journal or publications, depending on what you have. But turn it into content. Share the information with people. The second bit is we're quite a big education provider. So in the field of continuing education, we've now got some insights into what sort of skills you might need in the future if you're going to succeed as a veterinary professional. So how do we start to build that into the education programs that we run? And how do we start to make sure that in accrediting other people that we're building that skill? And that's really part of our role as an organisation. It has implications for veterinary schools and graduates. So as an advocacy piece, what are we doing to talk to the vet schools about, well, this is the future we see. These are the skills people are going to need. We've got this interesting ethical thing about training. How do we engage with them and say, okay, we need to start talking to you? And probably most importantly on this one for us is, I'll share probably about a third of our organisation's income comes from corporate partnerships. You know how many robotics manufacturers we've got corporate partnerships with? None. Genomics? None. Biotech? One. So the other thing is to start going, these are the relationships you need to be building into the future. Not necessarily for money, but relationships so that you're actually getting a dialogue together. And so in the wearable tech bit, we've actually built a relationship with the Medical Technology Association, because that's the space where they're into wearable tech. So we're starting to have that dialogue about what goes on. So the object of this is to bring these into your strategy and start to do things about it. So just to wrap it up, what are the components of the system? Why do we do it? Good governance, assess disruption, be on the front foot. We engage through the watch list, we talk to members, we find the themes that they're interested in. We prioritise them, what's going on, what's happening now that we need, what's telling us we should be doing something about this. We brainstorm and we separate scenarios from perceptions. Understand the difference between the two. We test and explore, we go back and we do research. We find out more about the topics that we're talking about. We report back, and that's a review process. And then we actually introduce plans to address those scenarios and bring that into our strategy. And at the end of the day, I think, again, when it comes to leading, and when it comes to leading organisations, the quote from Darwin probably holds very strong. And I think it holds very strong for everybody in this room and for the industries and professions you represent. It's not the strongest of the species that survives or the most intelligent that survives. It's the one that is most adaptable to change. And thanks very much for your time. I hope that was useful.